So if we go onto the Moodle site, so here's the Moodle site that you're familiar with, top of the screen, working way down, model answers. So if you look in the model answers, when it opens, here we are. Right, so these are the model answers. The first one is for the exam. The exam is not until May, so you don't need to worry about that. But the first question on the exam, question 1, is compulsory, and it always follows the same format, but with different data each year. So I can show you a model answer so that you know exactly what the format is, and you can follow that format, but you have to use the data in a different way for the exam that you're going to be doing. There's no reason for you to look at it right now. I'm just pointing out that that is the reason why it's there. Then we're into the 3 model answers that are connected to the assignment that you're doing. Why are there 3 there? Because last year there were 2 separate assignments. There was the reflection report and there was an essay. So the reflection report was around about now, and the essay was in February, I think, February or March. What we've done is we've dropped the essay. So there's no essay to do anymore, but that has meant that the report, the reflection report, had to get much bigger. And it's gone from being, I think, 1,500 words to being 3,500 words. So what I've done is I've sort of combined the reflection report with the essay, or part of the essay. Yes, there is the theory side of the essay. So what I've done is I've left the old style reflection report and the old style essay answer so that you can refer to them. You can think of the old style reflection report as being part 1 of our new reflective report, and the model essay has kind of been part 2 of the reflective report. It's not quite, it's a little bit different, but certainly the old style reflection report really is part 1 of the new reflective report. So what I've got here for the new style reflective report is obviously not a model answer, because no one's done it yet. I mean, I suppose I could do a model answer for you, but I'm afraid I'm far too busy to be doing things like assignments. So what I've done is a guide rather than an actual model answer. And I've already got this prepared. So if you open this up, and you should have had this already as an attachment to a message I sent about a week ago. However, I have made changes to this. So don't refer to the report that you've looked at in the email from last week. Always download the newest version. So this is the newest version. I don't think I'll be making any changes to this again. We've got a preamble here explaining what this answer guide is trying to do and how it's combining the old style reflection report and the old style essay. It's telling you the word count is 3,500 words. It's also explaining to you that this is only a recommended word count. It is not a word limit. So you can go over this by as much as you want and you will not be penalized. However, it is there as a guide to the amount of work you need to put in. So if you've done 6,000 words and you've got another assignment to do, well, I strongly suggest that you move on to the other assignment. If you've done 2,000 words, then it's probably an indication that you need to do some more work. Right, so we've got part 1 and part 2. Part 1, 2,000 to 2,250 words recommended. So this gives you an idea that part one is the most important part of this reflective report. It's taking up at least 2/3, if not 3/4 of the entire assignment. This part one, is, I call it inductive, but it's basically you giving your professional opinion about a company and its product. So you've looked at a company, you've looked at the data, and you've put together a structured, connected, coherent argument to explain why that company is successful or not successful. It's your own opinion, so you can refer to yourself in the first person. So if you're talking about your opinions, it's my opinion. Some people have this idea that in academic writing, the author refers to themselves in the third person. So you refer to yourself as he or she. I don't understand that. I think it's a very strange, awkward form of English. I'm a great believer in straight talking English because it's the concept you're trying to explain that's difficult, not the language. Right. So you know from the handbook that there are a number of different topics that have been given to you, different companies. You can ignore all of them and just do your own company. In your groups, you can do one company, and then for your submitted assignment, you do a company of your choice. You can all do the same company. I don't mind. It's entirely a free choice. All I'm interested in is the report itself. Now, I keep saying that you're using your own opinion, your own argument. That means that you should not be using, or you must not use, an established theory. So you must not use the 4 Ps, you must not use 5 forces, product life cycle, or whatever. What I've got here is my own model. So why am I telling you you can use this? Because this is a very basic model and it's not an established theory. It's really an illustration of how business works. So I think I don't mind you using this, and I'm quite keen for you to use it. But if you want to use your own framework, you want to do something else, that's absolutely fine. And in any case, this model has a number of exceptions to it. And that's what I explained down here. So the core value concept is quite important. So I'm recommending 600 words for this. That makes it equal, most important, with the value offer. I've talked a lot about company founders like Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Howard Schultz, people like that, and how they define the spirit or the soul of the company and then set the company going in a particular direction. And that's absolutely fine, obviously, because I'm the one doing it. But some companies don't really have a founder. Well, they did have a founder, but that was many, many years ago, and they're not really relevant now. So the kind of company I'd be thinking of, Coca-Cola, that we looked at last week. There's British Airways. There are other airlines as well, any kind of national airline, a flag carrier airline, as they're called. Companies like, say, Rolls-Royce. So Rolls-Royce, yeah, I had a founder, Henry Royce, but that was a long time ago. He's long dead. So these companies have no founder, but they still have a strong core value concept. If your company is like that, don't worry about it. Don't try and invent a personality and try and claim that they're somehow relevant. If they're not relevant, forget about it. Yeah. If you're talking about a bank, if you're talking about HSBC, well, HSBC, yeah, must have had a founder 120 years ago. I don't know who it is, so don't worry about it. Also, and I've got an or here, you see, or it might be the company has no core value concept. And that could be a company like, say, a supermarket or a company that's very generic in what it does, and that really there's nothing, it has no soul, it has no unique personality or identity to it. And if that's the case, then this is a company that can't claim a unique position in the market. Often, you know, I've given there as an example the Tesco supermarket. If you know who Tesco is a little bit like Walmart, I suppose, but Walmart has character. You know, there are people who always shop at Walmart. The thing about Tesco is, although it is by far the biggest supermarket in the UK, a lot of its advantage comes from simply being in every single town. Yeah? So they've got coverage of the market. That's where their advantage comes from. The reason why people go to Tesco is because it's local, and there's always a local Tesco. Yeah? So that's its big strength. If Tesco were to close down their stores, individual stores, people would not then travel to go to a Tesco that's further away. Yeah. So if Tesco were to close down stores, they would immediately lose sales, and then they would simply have to reopen those stores to get the people back again. It also means that Tesco don't have any particular products that people will seek them out for. Some supermarkets, I can think of one. There's one called Waitrose in this country, which is a slightly sort of upmarket supermarket, premium supermarket, you might say. And they don't have so many outlets, and people will travel to seek them out. So Waitrose does have a core value concept, not a particularly strong one, but it does have one. Right, so the value offer I've talked about, the value offer is the product or the service itself. Don't confuse the value offer with the core value concept. Starbucks has a core value concept of aspiration, middle class aspiration, lifestyle. The product is the coffee. Yeah? The premium coffee is not the core value concept. The core value concept is the soul, is the spirit. Yeah? Cost minimization, although this is only 300 words, absolutely vital that you understand this. By the way, someone's got their microphone on. Do you want to just mute it? Just have a quick check. Yeah, it's gone. Oh, has it gone? Well, just have a quick check, make sure it's switched off, because I'm just picking up a bit of background noise. So cost minimization, although it's only 300 words, absolutely vital that you always include cost minimization with the value offer. It might simply be, and this is why it's only 300 words, it might simply be economies of scale. So how does Toyota minimize its costs? It has huge factories. How does Tesla, how do they minimize their costs? In exactly the same way. They just have big factories. Yeah, so it's not really a big deal, but you must always look at the two together. Ferrari, if you're looking at Ferrari, for example, how do they minimize their costs? Well, they will invest in automation where they can, but for a company like Ferrari, it can be really difficult. I mean, what they should do is move production to China, Cambodia, Vietnam, South America, you know, somewhere with really low labor costs. But it's not going to work, is it? Because part of the core value concept Ferrari is its Italianness. Yeah. Okay, and then we're on to new product service. Right, we've talked about the new product or the new service. It needs to be an extension of, or it needs to be connected to the core value concept, the value offer, and cost minimization. If it's not, then you're into an entirely new business, and new businesses fail at the rate of about 90%. So 9 out of 10 new businesses fail. That's why I put in here, or you may argue that there is no new product or service that the company can do. An example of that, I may have mentioned this before, Rolex tried in the 1970s, they tried quartz watches. Quartz watches were the new product for the watch industry. The problem with quartz is that it's a whole new way of manufacturing, so you can't use the existing cost minimization strategy. You can't use the existing production facility. Value offer is a new kind of watch. It's got none of the, it works in a completely different way. And then the core value concept, there's no craftsmanship in a quartz watch. And a lot of the electronics are were probably imported from places like Japan at the time. Wouldn't be China in the 1970s, but certainly I would have thought from Japan. So it's lost its Swissness. Yeah. As a result, Rolex tried quartz for a few years and then went back to mechanical watches. So it could be that there is no new product or service that the company can do, in which case it needs to spend the rest of its existence focusing on the existing value offer and the existing cost minimization. That would be Rolex right there. And it's got the existing core value concept. So Rolex will probably never move on from 1, 2, and 3. I'm saying this because I want you to be brave and say if a company that you've looked at has no core value concept or there's no new product that it could realistically do, say so and explain this and explain therefore what the company needs to do. Okay, references, you reference in the normal way, but because this is your opinion, there should be very few references. So if you are talking about Tesco and saying Tesco sales went up by 5% last year, well, you have to reference it. You must have got that number from somewhere, so you need to provide a reference. But most of the time, you should be expressing your own opinion. So in part 1, I expect only 2 or 3 references. Right, so that's part 1, and you can read the model answer to give you a better idea of how part 1 looks in practice. Part 2 is a little bit like an essay or part of an essay or the literature review that you might do for a dissertation. So it's much more academic in its perspective, with one big difference, and that is that you're doing this after you've looked at the case study. So you're using this in a reflective way, which means that you're looking at the literature and then discussing how you would have used it to analyze the case study in part 1 and how that would have given you a different answer to the one that you came up with. Why am I doing all of this? Why am I asking you to do this? Because in business, we have theories that are not fixed. They are not prescriptive. They don't tell you exactly what you should be doing with a business. The example I've given before of the natural sciences is of the vaccine theory, how vaccines work. It's a theory that is so solid, so reliable, that when AstraZeneca and the Oxford University devised their vaccine, they were able to do it in literally a weekend. Starting on Friday night, they designed a new vaccine and they had it all designed by Sunday afternoon because they could do it direct from the theory. Then they had to test it just to make sure the vaccine did work and didn't have any nasty side effects. But the way they designed it, they were pretty confident that it would be all right. You can't do that in business. If you were founding a business, you couldn't say, oh, I'll just have a look in my textbook, have a look at Porter's 5 Forces. Right, I've got it. This is how the business should look. And you start the business 2 days later and it's a huge success. That is not going to work. You need to have that core understanding and instinct, a feeling, a gut feeling for the way that your business works, for the way the market for its products will work. People like Howard Schultz of Starbucks had that. And I think, although they wouldn't have used my model, I think that this model, in a very basic way, describes that kind of talent, if you like. So Howard Schultz, understanding there's a need for a premium type experience, one that's got a slightly sort of continental, foreign, Italian feel to it. And he understood that in terms of the product, that meant a premium coffee, delivered in a certain kind of way. So with lots of artisan skills involved, lots of noise, lots of smells, all of that kind of stuff. Cost minimization. He made sure that the coffee machine was one that could be operated by unskilled labor. A lot of it is automated, which they're not in Italy, by the way. In Italy, there's more skill involved, but at Starbucks, no skill involved. So what's the new product or service for Starbucks? It has to be part of the core value concept, part of the lifestyle, the Starbucks lifestyle. It needs to be in some way connected to coffee. So you can have different flavors of coffee. You can have a Christmas kind of coffee, and cost minimization. It's made on the same equipment. Or it could be tea, but it's not going to be ordinary tea. It's going to be Tai Chi. It's going to be something. Do I mean Tai Chi or do you mean Chai tea? I think it's Chai tea. So it needs to be a premium tea, and it needs to be made on the same equipment. Yeah. Okay. So I think I've explained all of that. Just be a little bit careful here because the marking criteria are on the next page. So you may miss the marking criteria. The marking criteria are not the same as the structure we've just been looking at because I look at the whole piece of work. So I look at originality throughout the whole document, recommendations throughout the whole document, your conviction, comparisons you make, theory. I'm looking for the whole. I'm not just going to focus on one section. I don't go part 1, part 2, and give a grade for each. I'm looking at the whole thing. I mean, obviously with theory, that's mostly part 2, isn't it? Fine. The recommendations, they're mostly part 1. There might be a recommendation in part 2, but I'm looking through the whole thing. Okay, I think you fully understand that. I'm absolutely sure. So any questions about that? No? Let's just return to the main screen. No. Okay, no hands up. Good. So now we'll get on with the lecture, which is about human resource management. Obviously, all of this is being recorded, so it takes all day for me to upload it because it's such a big file. But at least it's there as a record, and that means that you can come back and have a look at my explanation of the reflective report answer guide. Let's head back to the PowerPoint then. Just checking that you can. Yeah, you should be able to see this. I've got the red border around the screen, so that's indicating to me that I'm sharing it. If you can't see this, do let me know. Any problems, do let me know. HRM then, Human Resource Management. There used to be a department in companies called the Personnel Department. And the Personnel Department was a basic administrative function looking after hiring people, paying people, organizing their vacation or their holiday time, and then firing them or retiring them when they're finished. HRM, Human Resource Management, takes this a step further and treats the workforce as a strategic asset. So it's trying to align the needs for workers with the corporate strategy. And that means getting involved in training people, hiring people for the future requirement, It means engaging with issues coming up as part of the strategy, which might be part of things like gender equality, equal pay, perhaps setting up quality circles, setting up negotiations with the workforce. That's HR. International HR is exactly the same thing, but it's about adapting to local regulations, local differences, and aligning the workforce and more particularly the management, the international management, with the international strategy. It's not so much to do with the local workers. That tends to be a local problem. Local workers don't get transferred, generally speaking, to international locations, but managers are. So HR needs to look at the needs of an international company for international management. So very much a strategic role. We're going to be covering this in more detail later on, but there are 4 basic global strategies, and human resources needs to know how to fit in with whichever strategy is the one reigning in the company at that time. So just briefly, an international strategy is maintains the existing structure, home structure of the company, but extends it overseas. So it'll often include exports. So they're designed, manufactured at home, but they're then exported into markets around the world. It could be that there is manufacturing taking place overseas, but the manufacturing is exactly the same as the manufacturing at home. Japanese factories, Toyota has factories in Toyota City and factories in China, America, Britain, and those factories look exactly like the factories in Japan, and the workers work in the same way. Multi-domestic is the opposite of this. This is a multinational corporation which has units around the world, but those units are all independent of each other. So if you have a unit in India, it will do the design, manufacturing, marketing, service provision, all done in India. Global strategy is one that treats the whole world as one single location. So it's as if the world is a country. And therefore, if your best engineers are in Germany, that's where your engineering is done. If your best styling is done in Italy, then that's where your styling unit is. If manufacturing is best done in China, that's where your manufacturing is done. And then the transnational strategy is one that combines all of those 3 previous strategies. So it's a slightly mysterious, nebulous combination of the 3, which makes it difficult to coordinate. An example of this would be the Dutch-British company, what's the way of putting it? Anglo-Dutch company called Unilever. And they have units all around the world. And if a particular unit develops a really strong product, then they can talk about that product being globalized and being made all around the world. So in India, for example, they have a drink called Horlicks. Horlicks is drunk a little bit like hot chocolate. So it's in a powdered form, and you add hot milk. It's not chocolate though. It's they call it a malt drink. It's white and it has a malty taste. I think it's made from barley or something like that. Now, it was actually originally American. Then it became a British drink, and in Britain it was popular with older people, particularly before they go to bed, because it had a reputation for making you feel sleepy and helping you to go to sleep at night. And then, because I suppose the British connection, it then found a home in India, where it became enormously popular. And actually, it's popular with everyone. and it's popular more as an energy drink. So in Britain, it's a sedative, it slows you down. In India, it's seen as speeding you up. And it's given to young children, actually, to help them grow. It's seen as a healthy drink. So that would be an example of a company like Unilever, a transnational corporation that can transfer product from one market to another one and globalize it or localizing it, depending entirely upon the needs of the market. Right, international human resource management then requires the company or that department in the company to think about the management mix. So how does it move its managers around the world? Does it just employ local managers, or does it just use home managers and send them overseas? Does it mix the two together? And also how that management then manages the human assets, the local workers. A couple of issues that we need to bear in mind that have come up. One of them is the idea about the decommodification of work. Not, I don't think, a particularly well-formed idea at the moment, but the idea is that human resources at the moment tends to see employees as an asset, like a piece of machinery. So there are costs and there are profits connected to that person. A lot of work, actually, is socially useful work, goes on outside of this very limited, very narrow capitalist view of how human beings, how the workforce should be used. So human resources is really about exploiting the workers as much as possible. We don't use the word exploit because it has a negative connotation to it, but that's basically what's happening. You're trying to get the best out of the workers, and if you can't get the best out of them, then they have to go, or you pay them less. For example, if you employ a lot of women, women often have commitments outside of the workplace. They've got commitments at home. So if you were a nice employer, you might say, okay, we'll just employ you in the morning, or we'll just employ you from 10 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, a special shift for women. But you only get paid for those 4 hours. And when you leave, that's it. You go and you do whatever it is that you need to do. Decommodification of work, however, sees a worker as a co-investor. So they're working with the company to maintain its competitive advantage, to enhance it, and to support the growth in profits. So if you take that point of view, then female workers, for example, will say, look, I'm wasting time going to and from work, chasing around, putting my children into nursery care. Why can't I bring the children to work and put them into a nursery right here on site? The company might say, well, we don't do things like that. Well, it's time to wake up. If you do that, yes, it's expensive, but your workers are better off for it. And it might be that you can do a deal with your workers and say, look, we can do this, but we'll have to pay you less. And the worker will think, okay, that's acceptable, because before I was being paid more, but then I had to pay for childcare. Now I'm getting free childcare, and I have to accept a small drop in the salary. And they'll do the calculation. They'll figure out, well, actually, I'm saving on travel costs. I'm saving on time. So in fact, I'm better off. I can put in an extra hour's work. Yeah. So you can figure out a more enlightened way of working with your labor. But it involves a different view, and almost a non-capitalist view, or a kind of new capitalist view, where you're still working for a profit, you're still trying to use the capital more, but you're doing it with labor, and they're co-investors. And it means you then take on a broader social view. Training might be another one. If all companies trained their workers workers properly, it wouldn't matter if the workers then leave and go to another company, because the company, the first company, can employ a fully trained worker from outside. Yeah? Whereas if you've got one company doing a lot of training, then all the other companies don't need to bother, and they just steal workers from the company that's doing the training. Decommodification of work says, no, all workers need to be trained, all companies should be doing that training. Another thing that's come up is this working from home, and we're all familiar with this. I know you, well, you're doing it right now, aren't you? And it's something that we talked about for a long, long time. I don't mean me. I mean, you know, in society, we've talked about working from home, particularly with the growth of the internet. And it was very tempting to think that we could do a lot of work from home. And that saves on the time going to work. It saves on having to wear special clothes, having to buy a suit, things like that. It saves the company costs. They don't have to have so many offices. They can have a much smaller headquarters, smaller admin. So instead of an accounts department having to have 10 desks for 10 accountants, they only need 3 or 4 desks, because half of them are working from home. However, once we were forced to do this by the lockdowns, a lot of problems started to come up. So the technology itself is unreliable. We fortunately don't have this, but I was doing this lecture actually on Monday, and I had a guest speaker, and I'd given them 10 minutes to talk. It took me 10 minutes to sort out the technology. So 10 minutes became 20 minutes, and it took up half the lecture. So you're getting the full lecture. They only got a half a lecture on Monday. There's a structure in place in companies which is very difficult to maintain when people are working from home. So there might be a hierarchy, and it's difficult to keep that hierarchical structure in place. Of course, domestic distractions that we're all familiar with, and particularly for female workers, they're the ones who get not distracted, but because they so often have domestic commitments, if they're working from home, it's very difficult for them to avoid that. And I was finding this most of all with my female Muslim students who were going to university very much with the support of their families, but their culture was that the women, generally speaking, the ones looking after the children. So female students working from home, they would often find themselves looking after nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters. They would also have other domestic chores to do, like cooking and cleaning. Yeah. Now the boys, they also have their role within the culture, but under lockdown, under working from home conditions, they don't cause anything like the same kind of distraction. Social opportunities at work, very, very important. A lot of our social lives take place in the workplace. We have friends. We may not call them friends. We may call them colleagues. We may call them acquaintances. But actually, it gives us a whole new set of human relationships which are nicely, often conveniently controlled. As one of the great pleasures of working at a university is being able to work with women. This is for me, it's being able to work with women, and I'm not having to sort of impress them. I'm not having to chat them up or anything silly like that. There's no pressure on me. I can just enjoy working with women in the workplace. So quite an important social opportunity. And then random things come up. You happen to be talking to someone and you're just inspired to mention something, or they mention something and it connects with something you were thinking of. All of that randomness can't happen if you're working from home. And it's difficult to see what the role for HR is in all of this. They lose their influence. They've built up this strategic importance. What happens when they're trying to manage people who are all working from home? Right, so I said HR is closely connected with organizing the managerial mix. I mentioned those 4 strategies: the international strategy, where the home structure is dominant. There are extensions overseas, but they're very much the mirror image. They're the copy of what's happening at home. Generally speaking, then, there will be a tendency for the home managers to be the dominant managers. So the home managers are the ones who are sent overseas to run those foreign extensions. Not perhaps as much those you might think. For example, the Japanese, when they first started expanding into America with their factories, they were worried that American workers would work in a different way to Japanese workers. And they needed to impose that, the superior Japanese way of work on the American workers. So it was important that Toyota had Toyota executives working in Ohio, where the plants were, to make sure that the workers understood they had to work like Japanese workers. In fact, after a few years, they realized this wasn't necessary at all. And American managers could easily do this. It's something we've talked about before with culture. We have this idea that different cultures mean that human beings are working and acting in totally different ways, and they have totally different attitudes. Often it's not true. They're just different because that's the way they've grown up. And you can easily retrain foreign workers to do whatever you want them to do, as long as you pay them properly and you train them and you're fair with them. For example, I've taught this course in Hong Kong, and I was always told that Chinese students are raised in the Confucian approach of sitting there quietly and accepting whatever it is the teacher says. And that's what tends to happen in this situation right here with you. You know, it's very difficult to get people, to get you guys to converse with me, to get a conversation going. But it's nothing to do with Confucius. It's because I'm doing this in what to you is a foreign language. And it's quite a lot to ask of you to then suddenly start speaking to me in English. You may not have spoken English all week, for all I know. What was my experience in Hong Kong then? Well, in Hong Kong, they speak English all the time, don't they? Or they did in those days. Well, I suppose they still do. So it was very easy to get a conversation going and very easy to reorganize the culture of the classroom. They understood that in my classroom, I want participation. In my classroom, I want conversation. Maybe that's not what they do with their local Chinese teachers. That's a different culture. So I could actually change the culture to fit what I wanted. And it was a fair and reasonable thing to do. So it was easy for the students to go along with that. Right, multi-domestic strategy is very much about the local company. The local company is doing everything, so you have local managers running them. The global strategy, where you treat the whole world as if it was one country, then you need international managers who have an international competence. So that's when you can move managers around the world. You have an elite group of managers at the top, and you move them around the world as you see fit. It does mean that the middle managers don't travel so much. And in a transnational strategy, well, it's much more mixed up. So that's when you can find, yes, there are international managers at the top moving around, but there may be middle managers as well who get moved around. So who are these international managers, what we call expatriates? Now, expatriates are not the same as economic immigrants. So in this country, we have expatriate American managers, expatriate Chinese managers, Japanese managers, but they're not immigrants. Immigrants come here simply looking for work, looking for a new life. And they may spend the rest of their lives here, or they may be here 5 years, earn enough money, and then they go home. An expatriate is coming here as part of their career structure. They will only be here for a short term, 5, 10 years perhaps, but it's very much part of their career structure. As such, these managers tend to be young managers without any family ties. So Japanese companies do this a lot. Japanese student of mine ended up in Düsseldorf in Germany for 2 years. Don't think she was very happy, because Düsseldorf is not the greatest city in Germany, but I think it was all right. And of course, this can be done very cheaply, because with new workers, you can put them in a dormitory. You don't have to put them in expensive hotels or expensive apartments. You just put them in the company dormitory, feed them the company food, pay them whatever they were paid back home. That's young managers. Mid-career managers, perhaps ambitious to take on a senior position, but it's difficult for them because they may have family ties. And then experienced older managers who have no family ties. They've got as far in the company as they're ever going to get. There's going to be no more promotion for them. So it's a good opportunity for the company to disseminate their long years of experience. And it's also a bit of a treat, a bit of a thrill for the older manager to spend the last 5 years of their working lives in a foreign country. But this, although I'm showing you 3 different kinds of expat, it's still a fairly narrow range of people. So what are we missing out on then? Well, for starters, we're missing out on those female expats. Yes, you can send them in the first couple of years of work, as happened to my Japanese student, but once they get married and they have children, for cultural reasons, they have a lot of domestic commitments. They find it difficult to get away from it. Easier for a man. And sometimes a man, even though he's married and with children, will be sent overseas. The Japanese companies do this a lot. So you're missing out on them. And you might be missing out on local managers who are particularly talented, but they can't get promoted because your company has sort of created this elite group of expat international managers who go around the world, and the local managers then miss out on the opportunity to travel. These expats are also very expensive. So there's a tendency now to avoid sending managers overseas for 5 years or so, and instead just send them on short trips and use local managers more. But local managers may not be working for you, they may be working for themselves. That's the principal agent problem. You're the principal, you own the company. The local manager is your agent doing your work for you, but they may have different ideas on how the company should be run in that location. And also, because we're tending now towards saving costs and just sending managers overseas on short trips, they're not gaining that local experience anymore. So three basic ways of mixing up the managers. The ethnocentric approach is where you decide that there's something culturally important about your home managers. So we've got the Japanese companies setting up production overseas, believing there's something uniquely Japanese about the way they produce things, so having to send Japanese managers to manage those manufacturing centers. So you're tending to have home managers who are dominant. This has the effect of suppressing the local management skills because they can't get promoted, they can't innovate. It's all being coordinated from this distant home location. The polycentric one is one where it's the local managers who now set the standard. They're the ones who dominate. This would fit the multi-domestic strategy. It's good from a point of view of maintaining local knowledge, local connections, local networking, but of course it's difficult to coordinate. It's the principal agent problem again. You've got your home location headquarters, and it's lost power, and it finds it difficult to understand what's happening in the local operations, what they're doing, why they're doing it. So it also reduces that corporate learning. What they're learning locally may be to some great advantage, but how do you spread that local learning and internationalize it and spread it to the other units? A way of doing this is to take the geocentric approach. The geocentric approach is the one that would fit the global strategy, and it fits the transnational strategy. So this is one where you don't care about the nationality of the managers anymore. You don't care what country they come from. You just pick the best ones, and those are the ones you move around the world. So it's really great for getting the best out of the managerial talent within your company, but it is expensive, and these international teams, it can get very confusing to coordinate. And there is this criticism of expats that it leads to a brain drain. So if you're taking the best managers from your unit in Kenya, then it means that Kenya is now lacking their talents. And fine, you move them to America, but America has lots of talent already. So it creates this brain drain, this drift in talent from where it's needed in Kenya, Uganda, developing countries, and it all keeps drifting to America and Europe. However, studies, and I quote one here by Glavin, 2008, it may not be that bad. They are sending money home, so they're well paid. So you've got a Kenyan manager working in America, they're earning lots of money, they send that money home. It's a great incentive for them. So when they started off in Kenya, they're at university, they're doing like you, they're doing a degree or they're doing a master's. If they think, great, I can go to America next year, what a huge incentive for them. And anyway, this is all part of trade. Yes, you send managers from Kenya to America, but as long as you allow a free movement of managers, then you can send American managers to Kenya, and that would benefit Kenya. Eventually, most of these people will return home anyway, and they bring home with them new skills, new experience. Now, I've talked about how managers, expat managers, sort of fit a rough template. You've got 3 basic types of expat managers. But when you're putting together a team, you want to embrace a degree of diversity. You want to design the team around the purpose, around the purpose of the team. You need to know, therefore, what personality types are out there. What are the building blocks of your team? And Belpin, back in 1981, proposed 9 different personality types that you can choose from as a manager. So the first one is known as the plant. This is a creative person. They're the person who likes to propose new ideas, and they're then planted like seeds for the rest of the team to work on. Another personality type called a resource investigator, a very extrovert kind of person, loves exploring new opportunities. The coordinator is a more mature person, and they're a good inspirational team leader. There's the shaper, who's a very assertive person, and they like to drive the team forward. The monitor is a more serious person, not so assertive. They're the kind of person who quietly checks the details. The implementer is a very practical person, likes to put things into practice, and they're really good at administration. We've got a team worker, very supportive, works well with other team members. We've got the specialist, who has their own particular knowledge. is rather an independent thinker. And then you've got the finisher, the person who's rather conscientious. They're the ones who like to ensure that the team will complete the task in full and get it done on time and on budget. I think this is quite a useful set of personality types. You have to remember that when you're putting a team together, that you need to choose the right personality type. So if you were looking to put together a sales team, then you probably don't want someone like, oh, let's see, like the monitor, the detail checker, the finisher. You're probably not quite so bothered about. So you're not bothered about people with new ideas. You're not so bothered about the plant, but you do need someone like an implementer. You need team workers. Probably don't need a specialist, or did I say that already? On the other hand, if you're doing research and development, you're putting together a product development team, then you need someone like the plant. You need a resource investigator. You need a specialist. You need a finisher. You need a shaper. You need a monitor. Yeah? So those are the kind of people you need in the team. What you need to think of are just, you probably can't see because there's a picture in the way. Up there. But what Belpin was saying was, this is not about getting together a collection of brilliant minds, getting the best of each one. What you need is a collection of those minds. So you need to combine those minds in a brilliant way. If you're a good team leader, you can recognize these characteristics and understand how to get the best out of your team. What you don't want is 9 different personality types all in your team. They're all absolutely brilliant people and none of them can work with each other. That would be a disaster. Right, I'm trying to move on to the next slide, but it's not doing it. Here we are. Diversity. So important to have that diversity. We've seen it in the 9 personality types, but it goes deeper than that. We can talk about age, we can talk about race diversity, but let's just have a look at gender. So managerial qualities are often associated with masculinity, like ambition, drive, being objective, having authority. Now, this is actually complete nonsense, but that's the way we often perceive it to be. And the feminine qualities tend to be associated with communication, collaboration, and don't suit the rather masculine command and control structures. And there is this idea that for a female manager to be successful, she needs to master the command and control attitude and needs to do it better than a man would. For a man, it's coming naturally. For a woman, it's not coming naturally. So she needs to be even more of a man than a man does. This is not true. Absolutely not true. Women have no more predilection towards communication than men have a predilection towards taking command and controlling. And there's no reason, excuse me, let me just have a drink of tea. There's no reason why a woman can't quite happily have command and control and still, be as womanly as she ever wants to be. And for a man to be good at communication is not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of him going soft. Yeah, it can be just as good at that. I mean, the kind of person I might pick on would be someone like Winston Churchill, for example. Excellent on communication, a great speech giver. So the best politicians are great communicators, whether they're men or women. In fact, we've just had a woman prime minister. She lasted about 5 minutes, and that's because her communication was absolutely dreadful. There was a study done in 1996, or this is the one I've picked on, but there are many other studies on this about gender differences in the organization. And what this study found was that it's not gender that's important, it's the structure of management. And what happens is that traditionally men have dominated in management. So women are coming through now, but originally men dominated in management, and then they structured it in a style that suited them. And it's very much about style. It's not the substance. And women may have a different style, look as though they're doing things a different way, but actually they can be managers in exactly the same way as men. So, you know, a woman might have a slightly different way of making workers redundant that have to be made redundant. But if that's what needs to be done, they will do it. Of course they will do it. It's not that you need a man making that tough decision. If there's a new strategy, a new product that needs launching, you don't get a man to do it because it requires a man to be ruthless and to be assertive. That is total nonsense. Yeah? A woman can do it just as effectively, might have a slightly different style to the way they do it, but that's all it is. So another point that's important to remember about whenever diversity comes up in the workplace is that if you say we need diversity because people of another race have a different point of view, a different way of doing things, people who are older have a different way of doing things, that women have a different way of doing things, and that's why we need to include them so that we can access their different ways of doing things, then you are perpetuating those differences. You are perpetuating the stereotype. So if you say we need women on the company board because women are better communicators, because they have a more caring attitude, then you're saying that is what women do. That is not the reason why you want to diversify. The reason why you want to diversify is because you want to be able to access the best managerial talent out there, whoever they are, whether they're old, black and female, or young, white and male, doesn't matter. You're looking for the best people. And okay, let's focus on ethnicity then. So it's often seen that the American, the Western approach is very assertive, very confrontational, whereas the Asian approach is to avoid conflict for cultural reasons. You know, apparently Asians don't like conflict. I think anyone who's not Japanese and knows the history of Japan in Asia would think that's a bit of a strange way of describing the Japanese attitude. World War II would be a very good example. So, you know, clearly Asians will engage in conflict just like any other human being. Yeah? But they have this name for avoiding confrontation, I suppose. And a study done in 2000 found there wasn't really any evidence of this. What tends to happen is where there is a strong cultural identity in the organization, then that tends to lead to a more collaborative approach amongst the workers. Well, there would be, wouldn't there? If you've got a group of people who already identify with each other, then they're going to collaborate with each other. So if you have a workforce in Texas and you've employed a lot of Texan people, then they will identify with each other and they will collaborate with each other in a particular way. Yeah. So it's not actually about being Western or Asian. It's more that if a Western company is setting up in, say, India, then the workforce, the Indian workforce, will have their strong Indian identity, and it's that helps them work together. And then the confrontation becomes between not Western management styles meets Asian working. It's about a foreign manager or a manager who's not part of the culture trying to manage a new culture. Yeah? And that's often when you bring in a third party consultants if there's a problem with identity. So, okay. Oh yeah, and the final point about you know, this assertive confrontational style simply doesn't work. Managing the human assets, then there are three phases to this, recruitment, so getting the workers in there. 2, retention, keeping the workers. And then 3, retirement, letting the workers go for whatever reason. So recruitment, it can be done directly by the company that seeks those workers. So the HR department then has to identify the best workers. Indirect, using agencies. So that will reduce the costs of the recruitment campaign, but it comes back to that principal agent problem. You're employing someone to do your work for you, and they may not see it the way you see it, and they may miss out on the best candidates, or they may get the best candidates and not send them to you, but send them to another of their clients who pays better. Okay, and then these days there's e-recruitment, so using online agencies. And the nice thing about online agencies is you can spread your net much broader, you can do it very much cheaper, and you can reach out to people who are perhaps not actively looking for work, they're passive, and the whole process can be automated. But again, if it's automated, then how are you going to get the best candidates? You need that personal touch. For Western companies recruiting from the developing world, we've talked before about the brain drain and how you're stealing the best talents from that country, and possibly also robbing that country of the ability to develop its own talent. And we do a lot of recruitment of nursing staff from places like the Philippines. So the Philippines loses out on nurses, and also loses out on those training programs, because we're grabbing these young nurses, training them up in Britain, and then putting them to work in British hospitals. That means they're not being trained in the Philippines. Because there's so much of this going on in medical services, the study that I'm quoting here with its ethical approach is actually related to nursing, but it's one that I think you can apply to business. In business, of course, we tend to just recruit locally. If you're setting up a factory in Cambodia, you employ Cambodian workers. You don't bring in Vietnamese workers. You don't bring Filipino workers. So it tends not to come up quite so much in business, but I still think it's relevant. So the ethical approach to recruiting from the developing world. So don't just take from the country, invest in it. So if you're taking nurses, if you're taking workers from the Philippines, maybe train them in the Philippines first. Allow those workers to move as they see fit. There is a tendency with workers from the developing world to exploit them, to almost treat them like slaves. You've got to allow them that personal autonomy for ethical reasons. You need to be transparent and accountable in what you're doing. Don't just say, come over here and we'll get you a nice job, and then you don't tell them how they're going to be recruited, you don't tell them where they're going to be going, what they're going to be paid. You need to show them all of that. You need to be fair, so you need to tell them exactly what the working conditions are. You need to make sure that there's mutuality of benefits. So if you're bringing nurses or workers to your country, that you're also tying up, developing a relationship with their country and what goes on in their country. They need to have the same treatment as domestic workers. Again, for ethical reasons, you need to respect the cultural differences and give them relocation assistance. And this is all part of what I've been talking about, diversity in the workplace. So we're all looking for greater productivity. China, of course, with its rapidly aging society, is going to look for a big boost in productivity. We're looking for the same thing here because we've reduced our immigration. So we need to be able to recruit the best people, and that means opening recruitment up to people who may be older, to female workers who may have families to look after. You need to open it all up so you get the best candidates the candidates that innovate the most. And it also is good for your brand image at the same time. You may find you come up against political objections. We get a fair bit of this in places like the Philippines, where the government doesn't like us poaching the local workers. It can also create problems here. So we've got Filipino workers who speak, well, they've got their local language, but they speak Spanish. We don't speak Spanish here, so that causes problems. And of course, they need managing. So I mentioned before about diversity should be about treating people equally. If your diversity is based on stereotyping and you're trying to employ workers from India, because Indian workers have a reputation for being good with numbers and being hardworking for very little pay, then you're stereotyping them. Retaining the workers then, so you need to keep the workers happy, you need to keep them motivated. Couple of theories here I want to throw at you. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So right at the bottom, physiological needs, you need to provide them with food, water, warmth, rest. Yeah. Next one up, they look for safety. Next one after that would be, once you've dealt with those first two, the workers will look for teamwork, relationships, and then top of that would be about their own sense of accomplishment, a feeling of prestige, of status. So those first four you can deal with in the company. The bottom one, the basic need, I would actually put it with safety needs personally. I don't see why we would separate those two. But I suppose there are, some dangerous jobs like, I don't know, working down a coal mine, where if the first thing is you need to provide food, water, warmth, rest, and the workers may accept to a degree that they're doing a dangerous job. But still, I think safety is important. The one at the top, self-actualization, that's the one that's really difficult for an employer to be able to provide. It depends on the individual and what they're looking for. But those first four, tend to be within the remit of the employer. Herzberg has a two-factor theory and talks about the motivator hygiene theory. So hygiene items are those things that have to be there, otherwise the worker simply won't work for you. And I would say that safety needs and physiological are hygiene. Yeah? If you're not providing safety, generally speaking, then the workers won't come to you. And when they do come to you, because you have provided for those things, it doesn't particularly motivate them. It enables them to stay and they do the job, but they have no loyalty towards you. For that, you need to provide motivators. The motivators on Maslow's model would be the next two up. Well, I guess the next three. So, creating a sense of belongingness, teamwork, enhancing their sense of prestige. You can achieve this partly through appraisals. So you have a yearly appraisal, you sit down with your employees and you talk about what they need, what they're looking for in the future. I've got here, beware the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect is that people will change their behavior because they think that they're being studied. So if you bring someone in for an appraisal and what they really want to do is to leave your company and become a writer, a novel writer, an artist, something like that, well, they're not going to tell you in the appraisal, are they? In the appraisal, they're going to say, oh yeah, I want to be a more productive worker. I want to be a better team worker. So I'd like to go on training programs on how to be a team worker. They're doing this just to please you. That's not what they want at all. So that's the Hawthorne effect. You just need to watch out for it. And there's the safety net. So right down at the bottom of that hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Some things are starting to come up. Absenteeism, so workers taking any excuse to not be working. So they might genuinely be ill, or they might be pretending to be ill, but they're disappearing from the workforce. Presentism is the opposite of this, where they're coming into work and they shouldn't be. It might be that they're ill. It might be they're working very long hours, and you've got this Japanese tradition of karoshi. Presumably, you can read that those symbols reasonably well, although you'd say it differently. So death through overwork. Problem in Japan is something that they need to deal with, and in America, people work very long hours. We can provide increasingly co-worker support, so mentoring is very important. Coaching, I do quite a lot of coaching actually. In China, of course, you've got the famous Guanxi network. You may not recognize my pronunciation, but it's something that you're known for. And what I mentioned before about maternity support, paternity support, supporting parents, having creches and schools in the workplace, because this actually benefits everyone. And to do all of this, to provide that safety net as a manager, you need to have emotional intelligence. You need to understand the sensitivities of your workforce. You might want to refer to nudge theory, which we're going to talk about on another day. At the end of the road, at the end of the employment, well, it's dismissal. So you're getting rid of people. You have to follow the legal process. Human resources will have expertise in this area. You can't just chuck people out in public. You need to allow them a certain amount of dignity. You've got to do it in an ethical way. Constructive dismissal is when you make it so difficult for someone to work for you that they end up having to resign. That's constructive dismissal. You're not dismissing them, but in effect, that's what you've done. And that's certainly unethical and is often illegal. Redundancy is when it's not the worker that is being got rid of, but the job they do is no longer necessary, perhaps because you got a machine in. So you make the position redundant, and at least in this country, you need to compensate them or find alternative employment within the company. Offboarding, when somebody leaves for whatever reason, you should have an exit interview. So sit down with them. It's like an appraisal. It's like a last appraisal, but it's to try and find out from them a final word, perhaps the most honest word from them about the company, the nature of the work they've been doing, and why they're leaving. And it's also an opportunity to leave on a positive note, because you may want to re-employ them. Not so likely with retirement. When they retire, they're gone for good, and they're probably very happy to be going. So you need to help them years in advance with pension planning and possibly even retirement training. Help them to engage with hobbies and things like that. Okay, so I've got a few sources for you there to check out, but otherwise, that's the end of the show.